locate my call because I don't know where I am. But my ex just killed my girlfriend.
He just what?
He killed her. He drove the car. I was in the trunk. He killed her. Please,
Wait, okay, take a deep breath for me. I'm going to get your location, and then we're going to talk some more, okay?
I'm just so scared he's going to come back for me.
What is your name?
My name is Judith Button.
Judith? Hold on 1 second. I'm going to get your location, okay? Are you by, like, a gas well area?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right next to the green thing. It's a PAC drilling.
You said your ex shot her. What's his name?
Devontae Douglas.
So did he shoot her in front of you?
I was in the trunk, but I heard so many shots. So many of them.
Okay.
I'm so scared he's going to find me.
We do have people on the way. They're here?
Yeah, they're here.
Okay. All right. You did a good job getting her help, okay?
When I arrived at the scene, I could see there was a silver Chevy Impala. I could see that the windows had been shot out of the driver's side. Glass was all over the dash, and there was a female that apparently suffered several gunshot wounds. Whoever had fired that weapon intended to kill this person just because of the number of shots that had been fired.
This was clearly not an accidental shooting. A lot of rage and anger came out of the barrel of that gun. It was a very bloody, gory scene in that car. Honestly, one of the most violent crime scenes with a gun that I've ever seen in 33 years.
I also observed a second vehicle, a white passenger car, a distraught female, and then a small child.
Judith, she was obviously upset, frantic, talking to the officers. You oftentimes don't have any witnesses, let alone a witness locked in the trunk of a car. We don't know the connection between the victim and the killer. We've got to get what she knows and get it out quickly.
Adriana was like one of those people that you can depend on. You call one time and she's there, you know? And I found it strange that she didn't call me that morning because she normally would do that every morning. Her aunt contacted me while I was at work and was like, she's gone. It felt like someone just ripped my heart out of my chest. This is like a nightmare that everyone just can't wake up from. It's terrible.
I initially spoke with Judith at the scene. She's talking about this Devontae Douglas. We want to talk to him. It was requested to Youngstown be on the lookout for him in the surrounding areas.
At that point, I try not to make an assumption of how, what, where, why, any of that.
Everybody could be a suspect. This could have been done by multiple people or one person involved. Fortunately, we had a witness that was at the scene. So, of course, that was our main priority, is bringing her back and conduct a more thorough interview.
Judith is the linchpin in us solving this homicide quickly.
Take a seat.
Get your glass of water or anything?
Yes, please.
Okay. One for the little one, too?
Yeah.
Interviewing a witness, you try not to rush things. You want the story from top to bottom, but at the same time, you're also on a time constraint. We don't know if we have somebody that's on a shooting spree or going after family members. So we get that initial info as quick as we can from the witness.
Hi. How are you? Yep. I'll take this one right here.
Come here, baby.
In the interview room was Judith and her toddler son. She's in an emotional state, and I see the child. I have kids, so I immediately just try to get the child distracted so that Judith can focus on what happened and give us the information that is needed to try to solve the case.
All right, Judith. Obviously, knowing we're here, okay? I know this really sucks, big time.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm not going to sit here and hammer you with questions. So, what the hell happened?
The person that shot her is my ex and actually his father,
What's his name?
Devontae. For a very long time, he's been trying to get back with me, and I just don't have any feelings for him whatsoever anymore. And the person that he shot today, she was a mutual friend of ours, but me and her started kind of liking each other, so we wanted to try a relationship.
Okay.
And he was not happy about it. And then last night, he begged for his son, so I let him have his son overnight. And I texted him this morning saying, "Are you ready for me to pick him up?" When I got there, his car wasn't there, so I parked. And right when I opened my door, I seen him run towards me with a gun. And of course,
Where are you at with that?
I was parked right outside his house.
Okay, so he runs up at you.
Yeah, with a gun, and he tried to say, "Oh, I'm not Devontae, where's your money?" My dude said, "You have my money."
Is he wearing a mask?
Yeah, he wore an old red and black checkered face mask. Part of a Halloween costume from last year. And he just dyed his hair, so he has green all over his fingertips.
How long have you known him?
Just 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
So you know him to see him, right?
Oh, yeah.
No, there's no...
Yeah.
You walked by and you...
I would know exactly who he is.
Plus you had a child with him, right?
Mm-hmm. I know his body. I know his eyes. I know every single piece of clothing he was wearing.
Plus I should have noticed the voice.
Yeah, and I know his voice, yeah. I know him. It was him. I promise.
I don't see why you would lie about it.
And then he told me to get in the trunk. I didn't think he was serious. I thought he was playing around, but he pushed me in there.
And when you were in the trunk, your son was not with you?
Mm-hmm, no.
So in the car, was you in the trunk?
Him in the passenger, him in the driver's, and that was it. And then started driving around. He drove to a couple different spots, came out of the car, talked to me for a little bit.
When you guys were having these conversations, you still had the mask on?
Well, every time he never took it off. I just know him. So I know.
Did you ever tell him that? Did you tell him?
Yeah, I kept saying his name, and he was just like, "Who the hell is Devontae?" Then he was like, "Oh, I got the wrong person. Where's your friend?" And he told me to find a way to get her to meet up without her being suspicious and bringing other people.
So you texted her?
Mm-hmm. He texted her just to send her our location and then send one little text saying I stopped at that location as an excuse to get her there.
So he texted her from your phone or from his?
From my phone. He never used his phone at all. So the moment he saw her, he got up and just started shooting.
It's a very odd story. She got kidnapped, and they lure her girlfriend to come to an abandoned place where you have no other witnesses. She doesn't see the shooting. She's in the trunk, but she hears the shooting, and then he doesn't kill her.
Okay, so you're there. You're off the road there, I assume, right?
I could hear him running on the gravel. He ran, got in my car, turned it on, and we just sped off. I felt him stop, I felt him get out the car, and I heard him yell at me, "Count to 100, then get out." And I got out, got in my car. I just hurried up, went to his house. Devontae was actually at his house. He had changed his clothes. I just got my son, came outside. Devontae, he was trying to talk to me the whole time, but I was just like, no, I need some time alone. Because I knew it was him, I didn't want him in my car. So I wanted to hurry up and get to her. And then I just sped away, and I just wanted to get to her. I just let her be okay.
Right. And that's when you called the police or whatever?
Yep, I found her, and she
Judith was believable. If you sat down with her and talked to her, you wanted to believe her. But at the same time, the story she told us sounded like something out of a movie.
Judith was kidnapped by someone pretending to be someone else, taken to a remote location, if not an eyewitness, at least a hearing witness to the crime, and then taken back to the place where she was kidnapped and released.
I'm telling myself, why in the world would she make this up? If you're going to lie, you can make a much simpler lie than that. So it's hard to say she's not telling the truth, only because it's such a bizarre story.
Adriana had trying time going through school, so when she graduated, that day was a great accomplishment for her. She had a new journey coming on, you know. She was meant for greatness, and by taking her away, that greatness has died as well. Hold on, give me a second.
I'm trying not to think it's my fault. I can't help but think it's my fault why she's gone right now.
You know what kind of handgun it was?
Was it a handgun?
Yeah, it was a little one. Yeah, it was a black.
And he actually pointed it at you?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, and he had a plastic bag over his
You
head.
ever seen him with that gun before?
Yeah.
You said that he had a plastic bag on his hand?
Yeah, when he ran up to my car, I don't know if he had the plastic bag on when he killed her.
When you say plastic bag, you mean like the plastic bag is on and then
Yeah.
he's holding the gun on the outside?
Yeah.
Judith's statement was initially so unbelievable.
Oh, it's your friend that I'm actually looking for. And he has green right on his fingertips. He was opening the trunk to talk to me all the way. And
We have to do our due diligence and make sure that the story that Judith was telling us is corroborated.
Okay. Sit tight. Let's see what's going on.
The next step, once Judith gave her statement, is to find Devontae Douglas.
why did he kill her? Why did he take her from us?
Devontae had parked his car in an abandoned lot. His car had gotten towed by the Youngstown Police Department. So Devontae went to the Youngstown Police Department to try to get his car out of tow. He didn't know there was already a bolo put out for him. When he arrived there, said his name, presented the ID. Red flags shoot up, they detain him, and then take him up and put him in the interview room and waited for us to arrive.
All right, you have the right to remain silent.
We were at least armed with the information that Judith had provided. Now we had to see if that information jives with what he was going to tell us, if he was going to tell us anything.
He just looked like a regular guy. But as soon as I walked in, you can see the green in his hair and the green on his fingers, which is exactly what Judith said. But the goal of the interview, it is to put the person that you're interviewing at ease, not, you give us this information right now. That's not gonna work.
Okay, I'm checking Mackie. That's actually a real name, Mackie. Yeah, but people call me various things.
You almost have to make them seem like there is no urgency at this moment, that we're just going to talk. Because the more they talk, the more they're going to reveal.
Why are you down here now?
Vehicle. I was upset with my ex. We got into a big argument. I couldn't go to sleep, so went out about 5 or 6-ish. I didn't want to get in trouble for driving and drinking, so I got out of my car, started walking around. Then I found out my friend was missing, so I started looking for her. And then while I was looking for her, my car got towed.
What friend was missing?
Judith Burton.
Judith?
Yes.
So she was missing?
Yes. I was trying to call her because, again, she was supposed to pick up her son. I was asking her, did she pick him up? She wasn't answering. Then somebody answered, basically saying, who is this? I said, basically, who's this? He just said, he has her. I said, please let her go. Just make sure you don't hurt her.
So when you called her, you said somebody else answered her phone?
Yes. I don't know who the person was. It sounded like a gentleman. I was more worried about her, making sure that I wasn't trying to anger him and make him do anything to her. And he told me, don't tell anybody. So I tried to basically just look for her, see if she was around the area, but I never wanted to.
Probably didn't know where to look.
I've seen movies.
Mm-hmm.
She could have been anywhere. So I literally basically just looked every single where. I didn't want to involve the cops in case basically it was just nothing to really be worried about. Because usually I said basically wait at least 24 hours.
Right.
Next thing I know, she pops up in her car. I'm like, what happened? I asked her, literally basically about to cry. Where were you? What happened? She said she was kidnapped. She said she did not want to talk to me. Went in the house, grabbed my son, and left.
Why would he be after her?
That's the only one who knows more than I do is her, and she wouldn't even talk to me.
What Devontae is telling us, it's weird. It's an odd story. But there is always a possibility that what Judith said, the story that she gave us, is not what happened. You have to take all the information that is given to you and determine the truth.
All right. You know a girl named Adriana?
Adriana what? I know like three.
Three of them. What three do you know?
Ex-kiss's godmother. The other one just stopped talking last night. And then the other one I haven't talked to in about like 2-3 years.
Are you sure there's nothing else you did today?
No, sir.
Because why would you think we're here? Why would you think you've got 3 detectives? One from the sheriff's department, Hubbard, Weathersfield.
That's exactly why I want to put it
Liberty. Well, we have a deceased young lady.
No. 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 What do you mean? Do not tell me. Do not tell me my kid's godmother is dead.
I don't know who your kid's godmother is.
She goes by the name Adriana, but I call her Dree.
What's her last name?
Crockett.
I didn't say Adriana's last name. The reason I didn't tell him that is I want him to tell me that. I wanted him to give me the name and give me another line of questioning with him.
Why would she be dead?
You said a deceased young lady, you brought up Adriana.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not basically, again, I'm not slow, I'm not stupid.
I'm not saying you are.
Do not tell me. She cannot be. I just basically, again, had a fight with her, and again, I was trying to go to make it up the next day.
What was the fight about?
We've been fighting about basically me and my ex. My ex has been constantly spending time with her.
Okay.
That's what the last fight was about because they started dating. Please do not tell me she's dead.
Do you own a gun?
I don't know the exact name of it, but it's a G something.
A D something?
I don't know the exact dimensions because again I just bought it for household protection.
I get it. Everybody does, man. Especially you living in Youngstown. I get it. I get it. Is it a big gun, little gun?
Just a regular handgun. Basically, I lock it up when it's at my house.
Semi-automatic. You know what I mean. It doesn't have a wheel on. It's not a cowboy gun.
No.
You know,
Again, I don't like those. But you have a way of avoiding the question. Please do not tell me she's.
What caliber is your gun?
I don't know 100%. Again, the only time I use it is when I go to a gun range with my friend.
When's the last time you fired a gun?
The last time I fired it was with my friend. We went to the gun range, and it was like, I think maybe a week or two ago.
A week or two ago? So.
I will admit, sometimes I go towards the woods where nobody's at, and I fire it into. That was last night when I was drunk, because I wanted to let loose. You're on a Crockett. You don't want to talk about it. Who's deceased? I don't have to explain to my kids if that's not who's deceased.
Did you see her today?
No. The last time I saw her was last night when I was picking up my son. That's the last time we had a conversation. Then she texted me telling me to stop texting Judy, and I blocked her. That was literally the last interaction we had together.
Okay.
I was in that area. I was nowhere else. There's only one other Adriana. I don't know what else to tell you. It's just that she can't be gone.
Okay, listen, YPD's gonna come in here, and this is just us covering the bases. It's called a gunshot residue test. And it's no big deal. He's just gonna do a couple fingers. Right-handed or left-handed?
I am right-handed.
Right-handed.
It's just going to make him a little more uneasy that we're collecting that evidence from him. And I think he's taking that in. He's deciding in his head what to do.
I'm sorry for the green color, as you can see.
Understand. I'm guessing that's from the hair.
It was a lot worse.
At that point, I get motioned by one of the Youngstown detectives to step out of the room.
And, no, this is no big deal.
And he shows me a doorbell camera video.
There's ring cam video of Judith being kidnapped by a guy wearing a mask with a plastic bag over his hand. Everything she said had happened and how she got kidnapped was depicted on that doorbell camera. The evidence is starting to mount against Devontae. But on the video, you didn't see his face. And Judith did not see Devontae shoot Adriana. She was in the trunk was closed. We had to keep digging and try to get him to confess.
Well, I'm not quite sure where we're going to go from this.
What do you mean?
I'm deciding, do I lock you up? Do I let you go?
You think I killed her?
Did you?
What would be the benefit of me getting rid of her? I may have been angry, I may have been upset. The worst thing I've ever done is maybe flash my freaking gun. But killing? That's way further.
Yes, it is. Did you?
No. What would I benefit from it?
People kill people all the time without benefiting from anything. I don't know. I know I'd be pissed off if my girlfriend or wife chose another female to...
Yes, I found out last night, and that's why I went drinking, and I basically, again, just try to distract myself from them.
Maybe you're just having trouble recalling all that went on today. I don't know. I don't know. The only thing you have going for you is offering me reasons, regret, whatever. That's the only thing you've got going for you right now.
How can I regret something I didn't do?
At that point, I felt he's not going to admit to this. But Devontae didn't know. We had talked to Judith. I was holding out on that, but I felt it was the time to reveal our cards to him.
At some point in time, you kind of, as we say in wrestling, take a shot to see if you can get that takedown.
Well, we've already talked to your ex, Judith. We have talked to her. She's down at the station. Why do you think she'd be down there?
I don't know. I literally tried to talk to her about the situation. She would not talk to me.
Where was Judith today?
Like I said, the last time, basically, again, I saw her is when I was looking for her and she drove off. And then you're telling me that she's at your guys' police station.
She is.
So I'm not getting...
Does that sound normal that she'd be down at our police station?
No, it doesn't sound normal. But that's why I'm asking questions to figure out
where we met her at. That's where she ended up.
Where did you meet her at?
We met her at this little oil well spot. That's where we met her. A little out of the way off the road. That's where we met her.
Why?
Somebody put her in the trunk of a car.
And if you're saying she went back there, why would she be there if, basically, again, there's no reason for her to be there?
First of all, saying she went back there means that she was there once before.
So what then happened?
I'm hoping you can tell me that.
He said, "You mean she went back there?" Boom.
My heart skipped a beat. Don't move. Don't flinch. Don't say a word. Did Detective Mackey catch that?
I mean, there it is. Right there. He knew she'd been there before when he had her in the trunk.
I'm hoping that you're the kind of man that knows when has gone sideways and for the benefit of your children and all involved, that you're going to solve this mystery before we do. Because when we solve it, it's over. It's over. As opposed to you sitting here and telling us reasons, whys, what actually happened, who said what, who did this, who did that. We're not going to stay here all day. I'm just offering you the chance to get ahead of this and do yourself some good. That's all. That's all I'm offering.
And I'm giving you what I can offer. I don't know what else to give you.
I'm going to say it one more time. You know that we have talked to Judith. And Judith is a very believable young lady who's terrified for something she witnessed.
You keep saying you talked to her, but you can't tell me...
Because I'm not going to sit here and force you to say stuff. I don't do that. I've been doing this a long time. 30 years. I've sat down with a lot of people just like you. I'm not going to sit here and bullshit you. Everything I'm telling you right now is God's truth. Do yourself a favor, brother, because it's coming down one way or the other. It can either be on your terms or on ours. Look, man, you don't strike me as a guy who means to do harm to anyone. I can see it in your eyes. I can see you sitting there that you're just... Man, I messed this up.
I may have kicked a dog, hurt a cat, probably just over-disciplined like children. But killing?
Well, it could have been you didn't mean to kill.
But
People fire guns, but they don't mean to kill somebody.
But
maybe you were just trying to scare her. Look, I'm not going to sit here and talk you into anything, okay? I'm not.
You also told me not to lie.
Yes, I did. Don't lie.
But it's like, how can I not lie if I say that I did do it if I don't recall?
Well, Devontae, there is more you can say.
What more can I say?
The more you can say is what happened, what caused this.
All I remember is the argument. It started off we were bowling.
Okay, and that was today?
That was yesterday.
Okay.
I asked Judy, are you dating Adriana? And she told me she does not like to lie, so she avoids the question. I flipped out. I went home. So I started drinking the alcohol in my house. Left again around 5 or 6 in the morning. Drinking more, and then after that, all I remember is coming back to, and then basically noticing my car is gone.
You don't remember any part of it?
Sir, I swear, I don't remember.
He could have told us that at the beginning. He could have said, I don't remember what I did last night, but I know I didn't kill anybody. He never makes that statement, but now he's running out of options.
From my perspective, this is great. Say you blacked out. Say you went all the way to the scene of the crime and then you don't remember what happened. Now you're starting to put yourself into a place to where you're confirming everything that we believe we know at this point. More and more pieces to that puzzle are getting placed by him, and he doesn't even realize it.
She told me that something terrible happened. I kept asking what? Because I don't remember anything. Usually drink for the emotions to just drain away. I thought it was just a dream that I was just driving. I didn't, what did I do?
You stuck Judith in the trunk of the car. Do you remember that?
Because I know she doesn't like freaking tight spaces.
No. You're correct. Judith doesn't like tight spaces. You definitely scared the out of her. Do you remember being on that dirt road? Do you remember talking to Judith?
Like I said, I got drunk. I was just constantly drinking. I've been starving myself because of how depressed I've been.
Yeah.
And I guess basically I reached my point of how much I could take. Why would I kill her?
You remember firing a gun at all? I mean today. I mean days before, weeks before.
No, sir. I just want to know, why would I kill her?
There's no rational answer. It's an irrational act, and you know that.
The story is unraveling, and Detective Mackey just keeps chipping away, and chipping away.
You always want that confession. You want that straight up, I did it, you know. At a certain point, I start kind of trying to back him into the corner. I'm trying to do that non-aggressively, because I always interpreted him as the kind of guy that if I start yelling at him, he's just going to start yelling back.
It's a dance, and Detective Mackey was leading.
Here's the thing that makes me think that maybe you do remember more. Okay. One is that you tried to wear a mask. And the mask is one you had for Halloween. So, see, that's planning.
The only mask I have basically is a ruined up, basically clown mask that doesn't even fit me.
Well, this one didn't fit you very good either because Judas knew it was you. He put a plastic bag on your hand, thinking that would keep everything off it. It will not. It will not. That's planning.
But I
That's
didn't
not
have
rage.
time to plan.
But you did. You planned. You planned.
Yes.
You used Judith's phone to get her to come to where you guys were at. And she pulled down that road. Look at me. When she pulled down that road, you emptied that gun. Those are the facts. Those show planning. Those show intent.
I think of 50 ways a day to basically get payback on somebody, but we don't acted on them.
We acted on this one.
That's when I started drinking.
That's why I was giving you the opportunity to tell me what happened before I told you what happened. She was going to your girlfriend. She was choosing her over you, man, and you were...
That's not the first time,
Yeah. Yeah, but maybe you were making sure it was the last time.
Again, she's literally told me several times that she wanted to be with other guys. I got mad at her. And...
Well, all I can say, Monte, is that you'd had enough.
This is a defining moment in his body language when he rests his head down in his hands. Now he realizes there's no way out of this.
He's standing at the edge of that cliff. He can jump with a parachute or he can fall off. He's hitting the bottom, one way or the other.
I still like to believe in the human spirit, that people feel bad after they do bad things. So I'm going to ask you one more time to give me that opportunity to paint a different picture of yourself other than some guy who wears a mask and gets a gun and just shoots a girl in a car.
Yes, I did it. I basically just, like you said, I had enough.
Why didn't you kill Judith?
I honestly, truthfully, that's a harder question to answer.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because I loved her still, or because again I thought basically just that it would make things, but I don't know.
It's a good moment. Not necessarily a happy moment. I'm not going to jump up and cheer, but it was good to hear him say it, that's for sure.
We had a confession, which is great. It's a big piece of the puzzle, but you'd like to find the murder weapon, you'd like to find the mask, possibly the bag he had on his hand. So if this goes to trial, you have a mountain of evidence against him.
Where's the gun now? Listen, you got kids, I got kids. I don't want somebody random to find this thing and get hurt.
I know, but I do remember chucking it. It's in the woods next to where my car was.
Okay.
Like across the street?
In the woods. But everything is in...
It's in a bag, paper bag or
plastic
bag.
Is the mask in there also?
I won't say 100%, but probably. I should have just left it alone.
Probably.
Why would I kill her?
Well, I wish I had the answer for you.
We have the confession, but we have not found the weapon yet. So we get a group together and we go and look for that firearm in the woods. We had a screenshot of the location that he showed us where the firearm was, and by doing a ping on his cellular phone, we were able to recover the firearm in a plastic bag, like he said, along with the mask and his cell phone. Now I have not only a confession, I have the evidence to support it.
Standing before a judge Wednesday morning, Devontae Douglas entered a plea to charges of aggravated murder, abduction, and tampering with evidence.
Guilty. Those who knew the victim talked about the special person they lost and sent a message to the man who pleaded guilty to the crime.
Your selfishness caused so much heartbreak and uproar. In my personal opinion, you should never have any freedom since you took her chance to have a future in life in general.
And for you to have the audacity to kill her, I don't believe no time is enough for him.
When given the opportunity, Douglas didn't say anything. Judge Wyatt McKay sentenced him to 26 years to life in prison.
I hope you die in there remembering what you did and reflecting on the decisions you made that day.
Devontae Douglas is another man who chose the wrong way to solve a simple problem. There were 1,000 other ways to solve this that didn't involve taking some young girl's life. Just so unnecessary.
If Adriana was here right now, I would just try to hold on to that conversation as long as possible. Let her know that everybody loves her, they miss her. Let her know how much a big of a part that she played in each and everybody's life when she felt like she didn't fit. You fitted. You fitted and everyone misses you. But they say if you keep talking about someone, that memory and that person never dies. So that's what this is. This is keeping her memory alive. Today, tomorrow, and the next day.
The night it began, California didn't explode into chaos. It didn't announce itself with sirens or headlines or frantic phone calls. It slipped in quietly, riding on the back of an ordinary evening, the kind that never makes the news. Porch lights glowed softly along a narrow suburban street. Televisions murmured behind drawn curtains. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then fell silent. It was 1987, and nothing about that night suggested it would fracture an entire community for decades to come. And yet, in the space of a few minutes, a life was erased, certainty collapsed, and a cold case was born, one that would sit in the dark for years, waiting for science to catch up with suspicion. The house stood exactly where it always had, blending into the neighborhood like camouflage. Beige siding, white trim, a small front yard trim just enough to signal respectability, not ambition. This was a place where neighbors waved from driveways and borrowed sugar without knocking. Inside that house lived someone no one feared, no one avoided, no one warned their children about. Trusted, familiar, safe. That assumption died first. What happened inside is known only in fragments, reconstructed from what remained after violence finished its work. A sudden confrontation, a struggle measured in seconds, a sound, maybe a shout, maybe a gasp, that didn't travel far enough or loud enough to summon help. Objects displaced, a room rearranged by force, blood where it didn't belong, soaking into carpet fibers that would later be cut out and sealed in evidence bags. When the body was discovered, time had already moved on, indifferent, unstoppable. The clock on the wall kept ticking, marking moments that no longer mattered to the person lying beneath it. Police arrived under a sky just beginning to pale, patrol cars lining the curb as officers stepped into a scene that felt wrong in ways training never quite prepares you for. Radios crackled. Flash cameras popped. The smell of iron and cleaning chemicals hung in the air. Detectives moved slowly, deliberately, aware that every step erased something forever. They photographed fingerprints smeared on a door frame, indistinct but promising. They noted scuff marks near the back entrance. They collected strands of hair clinging to fabric, tiny witnesses with no voices yet. It all felt solvable then. Manageable. Another tragedy, yes, but one with an answer waiting nearby. By mid-morning, yellow tape fluttered across the street like a warning banner. Neighbors gathered in small, uneasy clusters, whispering names, speculating in half-sentences. Reporters arrived next, sensing a story where none had existed the night before. Cameras pointed at the house, then at the faces of people who didn't yet understand what they were part of. Words like shocking and unthinkable appeared in early broadcasts. But the most unsettling phrase hadn't been spoken aloud yet. Cold case. That would come later, after hope thinned and time stretched. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood with notebooks and tired eyes. Who was home last night? Who heard something? Who saw something unusual? Most answers were disappointingly normal. A late movie. An early bedtime. The hum of an air conditioner. But then there were the small things. Someone remembered seeing the victim speaking with a familiar figure near the driveway earlier that evening. Someone else recalled a car parked where it normally wasn't. Nothing concrete. Nothing actionable. Just impressions, half-formed memories already warping under the pressure of fear. The victim's routine was mapped minute by minute, as if structure alone could reveal motive. A trip to the grocery store. A stop at home. A plan for the next day that would never happen. Friends described kindness. Reliability. No enemies worth naming. The absence of obvious motive troubled investigators more than the presence of one ever could. Crimes without reasons are harder to solve, harder to live with. They suggest randomness, and randomness terrifies people far more than cruelty with a cause. For days, the investigation moved fast. Evidence was logged. Prints were dusted and lifted. Shoe impressions photographed. The fingerprints were run through the available databases, which in 1987 were limited, slow, and unforgiving. No match. Hair samples were sent to labs, their analysis constrained by technology that hadn't yet learned how to speak fluently in DNA. Blood evidence was preserved, carefully stored, its potential still years away from realization. Detectives believed answers would come quickly. They almost always did back then. Almost. The community watched, waited, and slowly began to change. Doors locked earlier. Conversations stopped when strangers approached. Trust, once automatic, became conditional. The idea that the killer might not be an outsider crept in quietly, uninvited. The person responsible had moved through these same streets, shared the same smiles, stood close enough not to raise alarm. That thought lingered, heavy and unspoken, infecting every interaction. Familiarity became suspect. Kindness felt rehearsed. Weeks passed. Leads thinned. Tips slowed. Some callers were sincere, others desperate for attention, a few clearly unbalanced. Each was documented, investigated, dismissed, or filed away. Detectives grew exhausted, frustration creeping into their voices during briefings. Without a confession or a forensic match, the case resisted resolution. The press lost interest. New crimes took priority. The file grew thicker, heavier, harder to justify keeping open at the front of the stack. Months became years. The victim's family learned a new vocabulary: statute of limitations, evidentiary standards, investigative backlog. They learned how to live with unanswered questions, how to recognize the look in an officer's eyes when there was no update to give. Anniversaries passed in silence, punctuated by private rituals of remembrance. The house was sold. New people moved in, unaware at first of the history embedded in the walls. By the early 1990s, the case was officially labeled a cold case. The words sounded clinical, almost gentle, but they carried a brutal truth. The trail had gone cold. Evidence sat boxed and cataloged. Suspects remained theoretical. The trusted neighbor, present that night, nearby, helpful in the aftermath, had never crossed the threshold from person of interest to suspect. No criminal record. No forensic link. No reason strong enough to withstand scrutiny. Suspicion without proof is just noise, and the law requires more than instinct. Technology advanced quietly while the case slept. DNA profiling matured. Databases expanded. Old cases across the country were being reopened, solved by evidence once considered useless. Hope flickered back to life in the halls of the department. The 1987 file was pulled again, its contents reviewed by younger detectives with less emotional baggage and sharper tools. Blood samples were re-examined, hair fibers tested anew. From the remnants of that long-ago night, a partial DNA profile emerged. Not complete, not decisive, but real. A genetic whisper from the past. Still, it wasn't enough. The profile didn't match anyone in the system. It couldn't stand alone in court. Once again, the case stalled, hovering in that maddening space between progress and paralysis. Detectives retired. New ones took their place. The file was passed down like an unfinished confession. Outside, life went on. Children grew up hearing fragments of the story, absorbing its lesson without fully understanding it. Don't assume safety. Don't trust too easily. It happened here. The phrase became a local warning, vague but persistent. And somewhere within that community, the person responsible continued living a life that looked ordinary from the outside, carrying a secret that time had not erased. Decades later, the smallest oversight from 1987, a fingerprint logged, stored, then forgotten, would resurface with devastating clarity. But in those early years, no one could see that far ahead. All they knew was that a murder had shattered their sense of order, and the answer refused to reveal itself. The street returned to quiet. The porch light still glowed at night. And beneath that calm surface, the cold case waited, patient and relentless, for the moment when science would finally give memory a voice. Time did what it always does after violence. It moved forward without permission. The house where it happened changed owners, then changed again, each transaction sanding down the sharp edges of memory. Fresh paint covered old walls. New carpet swallowed the floor where stains once spoke too loudly. Laughter returned, cautious at first, then louder, until the street looked normal again. But normal was a performance. Underneath it, the case file sat in a records room, heavy with pages, sealed envelopes, and the quiet accusation of unfinished work. Inside that file, the first months after the murder read like controlled chaos. Interviews transcribed in hurried shorthand. Diagrams of rooms sketched and resketched. Lists of names that meant everything once and then meant nothing at all. Detectives had done what they could with what they had. They had followed every reasonable lead. They had knocked on doors at awkward hours and asked the same questions until voices grew tired of answering them. And still, the center of the case remained hollow. The trusted neighbor appeared often in those early notes. Always cooperative. Always available. He offered timelines, explanations, alibis that sounded solid enough when spoken aloud. He was close by that night, too close to ignore, not close enough to accuse. Proximity alone isn't a crime. That fact frustrated investigators almost as much as it comforted him. He was interviewed, re-interviewed, gently pressured, then released back into the routine of his life. Suspicion hovered but never landed. As weeks turned into months, the tone of the investigation shifted. Urgency softened into endurance. Detectives began to talk less about solving and more about preserving. Preserve the evidence. Preserve the integrity of the file. Preserve the chance that one day someone would see what they could not. Boxes were sealed with careful hands, labeled in thick black marker, stacked in climate-controlled rooms designed to outlast memory itself. The victim's family lived in two timelines at once. In one, life demanded attention, jobs, bills, birthdays, obligations that refused to pause for grief. In the other, the night of the murder replayed endlessly, details sharpening instead of fading. They learned to read between the lines of official updates. They learned the difference between reassurance and hope. Each phone call from the department carried a weight that never diminished, no matter how many times it ended with the same words. No new developments. The media revisited the case occasionally, usually on anniversaries. Headlines softened over time. Brutal murder became unsolved killing, which eventually became cold case. The shift was subtle but devastating. Cold suggested distance, irrelevance, something sealed off from the present. But for those closest to it, nothing about the case felt distant. It followed them into grocery stores, into quiet moments, into sleep. In the department, the case was reassigned more than once. Each new detective approached it with a mix of optimism and caution. Fresh eyes sometimes see what tired ones miss. That was the hope. They read old reports late into the night, tracing the logic of choices made decades earlier. Why this lead, not that one? Why this person cleared so quickly? Why certain evidence was collected but never fully exploited? Some decisions made sense in context. Others felt like opportunities lost to the limitations of the era. One thing stood out every time: the forensic sealing of 1987. Blood typing without genetic specificity. Hair analysis based on visual comparison, subjective and fragile. Fingerprints reliant on manual matching, slow and incomplete. Investigators had preserved material they couldn't yet fully understand. They had done so on instinct, on faith that science would eventually catch up. It was a gamble, and for years it seemed like one that wouldn't pay off. The trusted neighbor aged along with the case. He remained a fixture in the community, his presence so consistent it eventually became invisible. He married. He worked. He attended neighborhood gatherings where the murder was mentioned less and less, until it was reduced to a cautionary tale told to newcomers. If he felt the weight of the secret, if there was a secret, he hid it well. Or maybe time had dulled it for him too. Even guilt can calcify into routine. In the late 1990s, a quiet shift began in law enforcement nationwide. DNA was no longer experimental. It was becoming standard. High-profile cold cases were cracking open. Their solutions splashed across evening news broadcasts. Detectives watched with a mix of excitement and envy. If it could happen there, it could happen here. The 1987 case was mentioned again in meetings, its file dusted off, its evidence inventory reviewed with renewed interest. Blood samples stored for over a decade were retrieved, carefully thawed, handled with reverence. Lab technicians worked with tools that hadn't existed when the samples were collected. From degraded material, they coaxed out partial genetic profiles. Not enough for certainty, but enough to suggest identity could someday be narrowed down to a single human being. The idea electrified the department. Progress, however small, was still progress. But the database wasn't ready. The profile didn't match anyone on file. No arrests followed. No dramatic press conference. The breakthrough fizzled into another waiting period, longer and quieter than the last. Funding shifted elsewhere. Priorities changed. The case slipped back into dormancy, though now it slept lighter, stirred occasionally by technological news or administrative review. The community, meanwhile, continued its slow forgetting. New generations grew up unaware of the fear that once gripped their street. The house became just another address. The victim's name, once spoken daily, became something you had to search for deliberately. That erosion hurt almost as much as the original loss. Forgetting felt like a second death. Still, some people never forgot. A retired detective kept a copy of the case summary at home, flipping through it on sleepless nights, wondering if he'd missed something obvious. A lab technician remembered the sample number, the faint sense that it mattered more than others. A family member kept every clipping, every letter, every promise made by officials who had long since moved on. Years blurred together. Technology advanced again. Databases grew exponentially, fed by arrests, convictions, and voluntary submissions. The concept of familial DNA began to circulate, using partial matches to identify relatives of suspects. It was controversial, legally complex, but powerful. Cold cases once thought unsolvable were being reopened with startling results. The 1987 file came back into the light. This time, the review was exhaustive. Every piece of physical evidence was re-examined, including items once dismissed as marginal. Among them was a fingerprint lifted from an interior surface, smudged but intact enough to preserve rich detail. In 1987, it hadn't matched anything available. In the decades since, the world had changed. Millions of prints had been added to national databases. The fingerprint was scanned, digitized, and entered into a system that didn't exist when it was first collected. Then the wait began again. Hours stretched into days. Days into weeks. No one wanted to say it out loud, but everyone felt it. This was different. This wasn't a partial profile or a speculative lead. This was binary. A match or no match. Silence or revelation. When the alert finally came, it didn't announce itself with drama. It appeared on a screen in a quiet office, a line of text indicating a possible hit. The name attached to it was familiar enough to cause a pause. Too familiar. A neighbor. A man once interviewed, once cleared, once trusted. The room went still. Years of restraint and professionalism suddenly collided with raw realization. Procedures kicked in immediately. The match had to be verified, corroborated, protected against error. Investigators reviewed the old interview transcripts with new eyes. Phrases that once seemed harmless now carried weight. Timelines that once aligned now showed hairline fractures. The man's proximity to the scene, his knowledge of details not publicly released, his calm presence in the aftermath, all of it reassembled into a picture that felt disturbingly coherent. But even then, nothing moved quickly. Decades-old cases demand caution. Warrants require airtight justification. Lives are at stake on both sides of the batch. Surveillance began quietly. Records were pulled. Movements documented. The trusted neighbor went about his days unaware that the past had finally found him, closing in not with accusation, but with evidence. The cold case was no longer cold. It was heating up, molecule by molecule, driven by science, patience, and the stubborn refusal of truth to stay buried forever. And as the investigation edged toward confrontation, one thing became painfully clear. Time had not softened the impact. It had only sharpened it, concentrating decades of waiting into a moment that would soon detonate, reshaping every life it touched. The surveillance began without ceremony, the way all serious things do when they finally decide to move. An unmarked car appeared on the street at irregular hours, never long enough to draw attention, always long enough to see patterns form. The trusted neighbor's routine unfolded with mechanical precision. Morning coffee at the same diner. The same route to work. The same evening walk that circled the block and returned him to his front door before the porch light flickered on. A life so ordinary it almost argued for innocence. And that was the danger of it. Ordinary lives can hide extraordinary secrets. Inside the department, the atmosphere changed. Voices lowered. Doors stayed closed. The case file, once dormant, now lived on desks instead of shelves. Detectives spoke in fragments, shorthand understood only by those who had spent years learning the language of unresolved violence. The fingerprint match had opened a door, but it hadn't yet given permission to walk through it. One match alone, even a strong one, was not enough to justify the weight of an arrest decades after the fact. They went back to the beginning, to the night itself, reconstructing it minute by minute. The neighborhood layout was redrawn using modern software. Distances recalculated, sightlines tested. What once felt ambiguous now looked different under forensic light. The neighbor's account placed him in his living room at a critical window of time, watching television alone. No witnesses. No phone calls logged. In 1987, that absence had meant nothing. In the present, it screamed. Investigators revisited the house, now owned by someone else, asking permission to walk through rooms that had been remodeled beyond recognition. Walls had shifted, flooring had changed, but the bones of the structure remained, and so did the angles. Standing in the same spot where the fingerprint had been lifted, detectives could see exactly how someone might have moved unseen, how familiarity with the space would have mattered. This wasn't the path of a stranger. It was the route of someone who knew where the floorboards creaked and where the shadows fell. The trusted neighbor was called in again, this time under the pretense of a routine follow-up. He agreed without hesitation. He always had. Sitting across from detectives decades younger than the ones who first questioned him, he smiled politely, answered calmly, spoke of the past as though it belonged to someone else. His story hadn't changed, not in substance. That consistency had once been his shield. Now it was being tested for cracks. Subtle pressure replaced direct accusation. Investigators asked about details long thought irrelevant. Weather, noise, lighting. Small things people often misremember over time. The neighbor's answers were smooth but too smooth. He recalled specifics with unnatural clarity, as though rehearsed, as though the memory had been polished rather than allowed to age naturally. It wasn't proof. It was a feeling. And in cold cases, feelings are dangerous but unavoidable. Outside the interrogation room, analysts worked in parallel. The fingerprint match was run again, then again cross-checked against multiple databases. Each time the result held. Probability narrowed until coincidence became implausible. A warrant was drafted for a covert DNA sample, something to compare directly with the genetic material preserved from the scene. This was the line investigators had been waiting to cross. The sample was collected quietly, almost invisibly. A discarded cup. A cigarette but left in a public trash can. The kind of thing no one notices because it happens everywhere all the time. That anonymity made it powerful. The neighbor never knew the moment his fate tipped. He finished his coffee, crumpled the cup and walked away, leaving behind more than trash. The lab process took weeks, each day stretching the nerves of everyone involved. Technicians handled the sample with precision born of experience and awareness. This wasn't just another case. This was history waiting to be rewritten. When the results came back, they didn't arrive with celebration. They arrived with silence. The DNA matched. It was definitive, statistical certainty stacked so high it blocked out doubt entirely. The biological material from the 1987 scene and the DNA from the discarded cup belonged to the same individual. The trusted neighbor was no longer a person of interest. He was the center of gravity. The past had finally caught up, armed with numbers and probabilities that left no room for argument. Still, procedure demanded restraint. The arrest couldn't be rushed. Prosecutors needed everything airtight. Defense attorneys would tear at any weakness, any gap created by time, any decision made under the influence of hindsight. Investigators compiled timelines, reconstructed chains of custody, documented every step taken since the case reopened. Transparency became a weapon. Nothing could be left to interpretation. As plans for the arrest took shape, word spread quietly through the department. Officers who had been rookies when the murder happened now outranked those handling the case. Retirees were informed discreetly. Some sat in stunned silence. Others closed their eyes, as if seeing the night all over again. The idea that the answer had been living next door all this time settled heavily on everyone. The arrest was scheduled for late at night, a calculated choice. Less attention, less risk, less chance for the suspect to disappear or escalate. Unmarked vehicles assembled a few blocks away, engines idling, radios low. Officers checked gear not out of fear, but out of respect for the gravity of what they were about to do. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a collision between decades. When they knocked on the door, the trusted neighbor answered in casual clothes, confusion flickering briefly across his face before being replaced by something else. Recognition, perhaps. Or resignation. The words came quickly. Police. Warrant. Arrest. Cold case. The language of the moment carried a weight that no shouting ever could. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, sensing significance without understanding it. Red and blue lights reflected off windows that had long since forgotten their meaning. The suspect was handcuffed, escorted to a vehicle, and driven away from the street where he had lived unchallenged for so long. No struggle. No protest. Just the quiet collapse of a life built atop a lie. News broke before sunrise. Headlines exploded across screens and front pages. California 1987 cold case solved. DNA exposes trusted neighbor. Shock rippled outward, faster than truth ever had before. Reporters descended on the neighborhood, on the department, on the victim's family. Microphones were raised. Cameras rolled. The story demanded faces, reactions, soundbites that could translate decades of waiting into seconds of broadcast time. For the family, the news landed like a physical blow. Relief tangled with grief so tightly it was hard to tell them apart. Justice, delayed but undeniable, arrived carrying reminders of everything it could not restore. They were older now. Changed. The person they had lost was frozen in time, while the world had moved on without them. Knowing who did it didn't bring that back. But it closed a door that had been left ajar for far too long. Inside the jail, the suspect sat alone, stripped of the normalcy that had protected him. The evidence was presented piece by piece. Fingerprint, DNA, proximity, opportunity. Each fact pressed down, compressing years of denial into something smaller, denser. Whether he confessed or not almost didn't matter anymore. The science spoke with a voice too loud to ignore. Yet even as the case moved toward trial, unease lingered. How many other cold cases waited for technology to catch up? How many answers were still hiding in evidence lockers, mislabeled or overlooked? The resolution of one case cast long shadows over others, reminding everyone that time is both an enemy and an ally. The trusted neighbor's arrest didn't rewrite the past. It recontextualized it. Every interaction, every shared smile, every community event now carried an aftertaste of betrayal. People questioned their instincts, their assumptions about safety and familiarity. The idea that evil could blend in so completely unsettled something fundamental. As the case advanced, prosecutors prepared to tell the story not as it had been imagined for decades, but as it had actually unfolded. A story of patience, of preservation, of evidence waiting quietly for its moment. The cold case had finally been solved, but its echo continued to reverberate, a reminder that some truths refuse to stay buried, no matter how much time passes, no matter how carefully they are hidden. And in the silence that followed the arrest, one thought lingered heavier than all the rest. Justice had arrived, but it had arrived late, and it carried with it the unmistakable sound of doors closing on a past that could never truly be put to rest. The courtroom lights were brighter than anyone remembered, a sterile glare that flattened faces and erased nuance, and yet every person who stepped inside felt the weight of history pressing down on their shoulders. This was not just another criminal proceeding. This was a reckoning decades in the making. Wooden benches creaked under the shifting of bodies, reporters whispered to editors through clenched jaws, and the air carried that unmistakable tension that only appears when the past is finally forced to speak. The accused sat at the defense table, posture rigid, eyes fixed forward. No outburst. No visible panique. Just a man who had lived long enough to see the world forget what he had done, now watching it remember all at once. His hands, once free to wave at neighbors and hold open doors, now rested cuffed on the polished surface of the table. Metal against wood. A quiet reminder that time had finally run out. Prosecutors began where the story truly started, not with the arrest, not with DNA, but with the night in 1987 that refused to fade. They painted it in stark strokes. The neighborhood asleep. The victim alone. The sudden rupture of violence that no one heard clearly enough to stop. Jurors listened as if leaning forward might help them bridge the gap between then and now. The language was precise, deliberate, stripped of excess. This was not theater. This was reconstruction. The evidence came next, layered carefully, each piece reinforcing the last. The forgotten fingerprint, lifted from a surface no one thought to question back then, now enlarged and projected for the jury to see. Experts explained ridge patterns, points of comparison, the improbability of error. Defense attorneys tried to sow doubt, invoking the passage of time, contamination, human fallibility. The experts did not raise their voices. They didn't need to. Numbers did the talking. Then came the DNA. The courtroom seemed to contract as the forensic analyst took the stand. Words like statistical certainty and astronomical odds drifted through the room, cold and exact. This was no longer circumstantial. This was biology. The defense objected. The judge overruled. The jury took notes. Somewhere in the gallery, someone quietly exhaled, as if holding their breath had become unbearable. Witnesses followed, some expected, others unsettling in their ordinariness. Former neighbors described routines, habits, moments that once seemed insignificant. A late-night light turning on, a door opening and closing, sounds dismissed at the time as nothing more than life continuing. Now those fragments were reassembled into something darker. Memory, fragile and imperfect, was being asked to carry more weight than it ever should have, and yet it held. The victim's family testified last. Not because their words proved guilt, but because their presence explained why this mattered. Decades of waiting, of birthdays marked by absence, of unanswered questions echoing through generations. There were tears, but they were quiet, controlled, shaped by years of practice. Grief had long ago hardened into something enduring. The courtroom listened differently then, as if everyone understood that justice without acknowledgement was hollow. The defense's case leaned heavily on time, on the idea that memories decay, evidence degrades, motives blur. They suggested alternative explanations, unnamed suspects, investigative blind spots from the 1980s. They implied that reopening old wounds was itself a kind of injustice. It was a familiar strategy, one used in countless cold cases brought back to life. Sometimes it worked. This time it struggled to breathe. When closing arguments arrived, the tension sharpened. Prosecutors spoke of patience, of science advancing while truth waited. They framed the case not as an obsession with the past, but as a promise kept. Defense attorneys warned of precedent, of condemning a man based on evidence that had slept for decades. They urged caution. They urged doubt. They urged jurors to consider the cost of being wrong. The jury disappeared behind closed doors, taking with them years of investigation, testimony, and unresolved history. Hours stretched. News outlets filled the silence with speculation. The defendant sat motionless, staring at a spot on the wall as if willing it to erase everything else. Somewhere beyond the courthouse, life went on, indifferent to the gravity of what was unfolding inside. When the jury returned, the room stood. The verdict was read in a voice that trembled only slightly. Guilty. The word landed heavily, not with triumph but with finality. The trusted neighbor was no longer trusted, no longer a neighbor, just a man convicted of a crime he had once believed buried. Sentencing came later, but its outcome was almost beside the point. The real sentence had already been passed by time itself. A life lived under false normalcy had collapsed in a matter of months. The community reacted with a mix of relief and disbelief. People replayed interactions in their minds, searching for signs they might have missed. There were none that mattered. That was the most unsettling part. In interviews, investigators spoke carefully. They emphasized process over drama, persistence over luck. They talked about evidence lockers, about advances in forensic science, about the importance of never giving up on unanswered questions. They did not celebrate. They knew better. Every solved cold case is also a reminder of how long justice can take to arrive. The house on the street where it all began sat quiet again, its windows dark, its lawn trimmed by someone new. It looked ordinary, harmless, indistinguishable from the others. And yet, for those who knew the story, it had become something else entirely. A landmark of deception. A symbol of how close violence can live to normalcy without being noticed. The victim's name appeared in headlines one last time, paired with words like closure and resolution. But closure is a dangerous word. It implies an ending neat enough to fold away. What the family felt was not closure. It was recognition. A confirmation that the truth they had carried alone for so long was finally acknowledged by the world. As the case faded from the news cycle, replaced by newer tragedies and fresher shocks, its lessons lingered. Evidence matters. Time lies. And the past is never as quiet as it seems. Somewhere in lockers and archives across the country, other answers waited, patient and unforgiving, ready to rise when science and persistence aligned once more. The California 1987 cold case was no longer cold. It was solved, recorded, archived. But its echo remained, a low hum beneath everyday life, reminding everyone who heard it that justice does not forget, even when people do, and that the most trusted faces can sometimes hide the darkest truths, for longer than anyone wants to admit. The verdict did not end the story, cracked it open. In the days that followed, the community did what communities always do when the unthinkable becomes undeniable. It dissected every memory, every smile, every casual wave exchanged across fences and driveways. Conversations grew quieter, more cautious. People lowered their voices when they said his name, as if volume alone could summon shame. Trust, once freely given, now felt like a liability that had been mismanaged for decades. Reporters returned to the neighborhood, standing on sidewalks that suddenly felt like historical ground. Microphones hovered near faces lined with confusion and guilt. Neighbors spoke of barbecues, of borrowed tools, of holiday greetings exchanged with a man now officially labeled a killer. They spoke not to excuse themselves, but to understand how proximity could coexist with blindness for so long. The word normal surfaced again and again, each time sounding less reassuring. Inside the courthouse, paperwork continued. Motions were filed. Appeals were hinted at. Defense attorneys prepared arguments not to prove innocence, but to challenge process. They focused on chain of custody, on the handling of evidence through the Reagan era and beyond. They suggested that a single error, a single mislabeled envelope, could collapse everything. Prosecutors countered with documentation so meticulous it bordered on obsessive. Every transfer logged, every seal accounted for. The system, often criticized for failure, was now defending its own integrity. Behind the scenes, detectives who had worked the case over the years reflected privately. Some were retired. Some had passed away without ever knowing the ending. Their notes, yellowed and handwritten, had guided hands decades younger. Interviews once dismissed as dead ends were reread with new eyes. One detective admitted that the suspect's name had appeared early on, buried among dozens of others, indistinguishable at the time from the noise. The realization stung, not because of incompetence but because of limits. For the victim's family, life entered a strange new phase. The waiting was over, but the absence remained. They spoke of relief that came in waves, followed by unexpected exhaustion. Closure again proved elusive. What they gained was certainty. A solid answer where there had once been only speculation. It did not heal the wound, it gave it shape. And shape, unlike ambiguity, can at least be named. The defendant was transferred to a facility far from the neighborhood that had once known him so well. His house was sold quietly. New occupants moved in, unaware at first of its history. Eventually they would learn. Someone always tells them. Crimes like this leave a residue that no renovation can fully erase. Walls remember. Streets remember. Even if people pretend not to. National media picked up the story, framing it as a triumph of forensic science. Headlines celebrated DNA databases, advancements in technology, the power of patience. Experts were invited onto panels to explain how old evidence could suddenly speak. They used charts, timelines, clean language. What they could not convey was the human cost of delay. Science moved forward. Time did not rewind. Cold case units across the country took notice. Evidence lockers were reopened. Old files were digitized. Names long dormant resurfaced in internal discussions. Some cases moved quickly. Others stalled again, resistant to progress. For every success story there were dozens still waiting, their outcomes uncertain. The California 1987 case became a reference point, a reminder that persistence sometimes pays off, but never guarantees redemption. The defense eventually filed an appeal, citing procedural concerns and the reliability of decades-old DNA. The motion was denied. Judges acknowledged the weight of time but emphasized the strength of corroboration. Multiple forms of evidence, independent yet converging, had told the same story. This was not a single strand holding up a verdict. It was a rope. Public reaction shifted subtly. Initial shock gave way to reflection. Opinion pieces questioned how many similar crimes remained unsolved, how many perpetrators lived unremarkable lives just out of reach. Trust as a concept was scrutinized. Commentators warned against paranoia, while admitting that assumptions can be dangerous. The line between vigilance and suspicion blurred. In the quiet moments, investigators revisited the beginning. The first responders. The initial mistakes. The choices made under pressure, with limited tools and imperfect information. There was no scapegoat to blame, no villain in uniform. Just people doing their best within constraints that now seemed archaic. The case was solved not because the past was flawless, but because the present refused to let it stay buried. The victim's name was etched into official records with new context. Not just a case number anymore, not just a photograph pinned to a board. A story completed, if not concluded. Memorials were small private affairs. Family and close friends gathered without cameras, without commentary. They spoke freely then, allowing themselves moments of anger, sadness, even grim satisfaction. All of it was allowed. All of it was earned. As months passed, the story receded from public consciousness. New cases replaced it. New headlines screamed for attention. But for those directly involved, the resolution lingered. It shaped how they saw the world, how they evaluated neighbors, how they interpreted silence. The lesson was not that everyone hides secrets, but that some secrets hide exceptionally well. The evidence locker that had held the key was reorganized, modernized. Labels were replaced. Digital backups created. It became a symbol within the department, referenced during training sessions. A reminder that answers can sit inches away for years, waiting for the right moment to matter. Patience in law enforcement is not passive. It is an active refusal to forget. In interviews years later, when asked what finally solved the case, one investigator paused. He did not say DNA. He did not say technology. He said stubbornness. The unwillingness to accept that time itself could be an excuse. The belief that unanswered questions demand respect, no matter how old they are. It was not a glamorous answer. It was an honest one. The community eventually stabilized. New families moved in. Children played on sidewalks unaware of the history beneath their feet. Life reclaimed its routines. And yet, every so often, someone would glance at a familiar house, or recall a neighbor's smile, and feel a brief, unsettling chill. Not fear. Awareness. The knowledge that normal can be deceptive, and that truth does not announce itself on schedule. The California 1987 cold case had reached its legal end, but its psychological footprint endured. It lived on in cautionary tales, in training manuals, in late-night conversations about trust and time. It stood as proof that the past is never fully past, that silence is not the same as innocence, and that even the longest shadows can eventually be traced back to their source. And somewhere, deep within the system, other cases waited. Names, dates, evidence sealed and shelved. Each one a question mark suspended in time. Watching, waiting, ready to remind the world once again that justice may be slow, but it is relentless, and that no amount of familiarity can truly guarantee safety when the truth has yet to be spoken. Time moved forward, but the case refused to stay still. Even after the conviction settled into legal finality, ripples continued to spread outward, touching places no verdict could neatly contain. Inside the department, the case became a living document, reopened not for doubt, but for study. Detectives sat in briefing rooms late at night, replaying audio, rereading transcripts, dissecting decisions made when the world was analog and instincts mattered more than algorithms. Every pause, every missed follow-up, every assumption was examined under unforgiving light. The phrase cold case no longer felt abstract. It carried weight now. It meant evidence aging in darkness, witnesses aging in silence, memories degrading like exposed film. It meant years where nothing happened and then suddenly everything did. Investigators spoke quietly about how close the truth had been in 1987, how it hovered just outside reach, obscured not by malice but by limitations. There was no villain in the process, only time itself, stretching, distorting, dulling urgency. Forensic experts were invited back to explain the science behind the breakthrough. Not to the media this time, but to officers who wanted to understand every detail. They talked about degradation, about partial profiles, about how probability can sharpen into certainty when enough fragments align. They described the DNA sample as a whisper that grew louder with each technological leap, until it could no longer be ignored. The room listened in silence, aware that other whispers still waited. Outside the institution, the community wrestled with its own aftershocks. Therapy offices saw an uptick in appointments. Old residents revisited memories they had filed away as harmless. A neighbor's odd habit. A glance held too long. A moment that felt wrong but passed without consequence. None of it proved anything, yet all of it now carried new meaning. Retrospective suspicion became a shared burden, a quiet tax paid by hindsight. The defendant's family remained largely silent. When they did speak, it was through carefully worded statements, emphasizing disbelief, grief, and the complexity of reconciling love with evidence. They were victims of a different kind, trapped between loyalty and reality. The public offered little sympathy. In high-profile cold cases, nuance rarely survives. There is room for justice and room for outrage, but compassion often falls through the cracks. Meanwhile, the victim's family navigated anniversaries that felt newly charged. Dates once marked by unresolved pain now carried a strange duality. They remembered loss but also resolution. Mourning became layered, less chaotic but no less heavy. They spoke of dreams where the past replayed with altered endings, scenes rewritten by knowledge that had arrived too late to change anything that mattered. Documentarians reached out. Podcasters requested interviews. Producers pitched reenactments. The story was marketable now, packaged as a triumph over time. Some offers were accepted. Others declined. The family learned quickly that not every retelling honored the truth. Sensationalism crept in, sharpening edges, simplifying motives, compressing years into neat arcs. Reality resisted structure. It always had. Within law enforcement circles, the case sparked debate. Some argued it validated decades of preserving evidence at enormous cost. Others questioned whether resources should focus forward rather than backward. The answer, as always, lived somewhere uncomfortable in between. Solving the past did not prevent future crimes, but it restored faith. a fragile currency that policing depends on more than statistics. A retired detective, one of the original responders, agreed to speak at a closed seminar. His voice shook as he described the night of the crime, the smell of damp asphalt, the sound of radios crackling with urgency. He admitted mistakes openly, not errors of negligence but of assumption. He thought the perpetrator would look a certain way, act a certain way. He learned too late that monsters often blend in because blending in is safer than standing out. That admission landed hard. Younger officers took notes not because it would be on a test but because it challenged something fundamental. Bias, even unconscious, shapes investigations. The California 1987 cold case was not just a lesson in patience or technology. It was a warning about certainty, about how confidence, unchecked, can close doors before they are fully opened. The media cycle slowed, but the internet did not forget. Forums dissected trial transcripts line by line. Armchair analysts proposed alternate theories, questioned motives, speculated endlessly. Some claimed the wrong man had been convicted. Others believed he was responsible for more crimes still hidden. Truth became diluted in the noise, stretched thin across speculation and suspicion. Justice had spoken, but the crowd continued to argue. In quiet offices, cold case units quietly prioritized files. Boxes were pulled. Evidence was retested. Families received calls they never expected. Not all news was good. Some cases confirmed long-held fears. Others remained stubbornly silent. Each outcome carried weight. Hope, once reignited, is difficult to extinguish without consequence. The original neighborhood underwent subtle changes. Streetlights were replaced. Sidewalks repaired. Fresh paint covered old facades. Progress marched on, indifferent to memory. Yet certain residents swore the air felt different, heavier in places. Not haunted, just aware. As if the land itself had absorbed decades of secrets and now exhaled them slowly. The prosecutor, asked in a rare follow-up interview whether the case changed him, paused. He spoke of humility, of understanding that justice is not a straight line, but a jagged path with long stretches of darkness. He admitted that victories feel quieter when they arrive late. Necessary but muted. There is no celebration when years have already done their damage. As appeals faded and paperwork closed, the case entered archives labeled solved, a word both definitive and misleading. Solved meant identified, convicted, concluded in the eyes of the law. It did not mean repaired. It did not mean healed. It meant the question had an answer, nothing more. In the end, what lingered most was not the science, not the courtroom drama, but the waiting. Decades where a truth existed, fully formed but unreachable. Decades where a man lived freely, while another family lived suspended between hope and despair. That imbalance, once revealed, could not be unseen. The California 1987 cold case became a benchmark not because it was unique, but because it was familiar. A reminder that history is crowded with unfinished stories, that progress arrives unevenly, and that justice, when delayed, carries a different kind of gravity. It settles slower. It echoes longer. And as night fell over cities far beyond California, evidence lockers remained closed, names remained unsolved, and investigators continued their quiet vigil. Because somewhere in some forgotten box, another whisper waited. Not loud yet, not clear, but patient. And patience, as this case proved, can be far more dangerous than silence. Long after the courtroom emptied and the final paperwork was filed, the case refused to rest. It lived on in fragments, in conversations that began quietly and ended with uneasy silence. In police academies, instructors referenced it without drama, presenting it as a cautionary tale rather than a trophy. A California 1987 cold case solved was no longer just a headline. It was a pressure point, pressed again and again to remind everyone how fragile certainty can be. The cold case unit felt the weight most acutely. Detectives who had inherited the file years earlier now found themselves carrying something heavier than closure. Solving one case created an expectation, an unspoken demand that others should follow. Families from unrelated investigations began calling more frequently. They mentioned DNA. They mentioned technology. They asked why their case was still unsolved if this one could be cracked after decades. There were no easy answers, only careful explanations that sounded hollow even to the people delivering them. Evidence, it turned out, was not equal. Some boxes held miracles. Others held nothing but dust and disappointment. In this case, luck and preservation had aligned just long enough. In many others, time had erased what science needed to speak. That reality settled into the unit like a low fog, dampening optimism without extinguishing it completely. The lead investigator found himself replaying moments that once seemed insignificant. A neighbor waving from across the street. A casual comment during an early canvass. A name written down, then circled, then quietly dismissed. It haunted him not because it proved negligence, but because it illustrated how human judgment operates under pressure. Investigations are built on decisions made quickly, often with incomplete information. Years later, those decisions are judged by outcomes that could not have been predicted. Sleep became elusive. When he did rest, dreams replayed the case in distorted loops. Evidence spoke. Houses watched. Streets whispered. He woke with the unsettling sense that the past was not finished, that it was merely waiting for attention again. Solving the case had not ended the story. It had widened it. The convicted man adjusted to prison life with unsettling calm. Guards noted his routine, his silence, his refusal to engage with programs that encouraged reflection or remorse. He maintained innocence in brief, controlled statements, careful never to elaborate. Psychologists debated what that meant. Denial, strategy, or a genuine inability to reconcile self-image with evidence. The truth of his inner world remained inaccessible, locked behind layers of self-preservation. For the victim's family, time took on a different shape. Closure was not a single moment but a series of small, uneven steps. Some days felt lighter, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. Other days were heavier than before, burdened by the knowledge of who had lived nearby, who had smiled at block parties, who had shared casual greetings while carrying a secret that altered everything. They revisited photographs, this time with a different lens. Smiles frozen in time now carried an undercurrent of what-ifs. They spoke about forgiveness in abstract terms, not as an action but as a concept they might one day approach. For now, understanding was enough. Knowing was enough. It had to be. The neighborhood reacted in waves. Initial shock gave way to a quieter, more insidious discomfort. Trust, once broken, does not mend cleanly. The phrase. People locked doors earlier. They hesitated longer before letting new faces in. Children who had grown up hearing whispers about the crime now learned the full story, absorbing it with the uneasy awareness that danger does not always announce itself. Journalists returned months later, searching for epilogues. They wanted transformation, redemption, neat conclusions. What they found instead were contradictions. A community safer on paper but less certain emotionally. A family relieved but permanently altered. A justice system vindicated and indicted all at once. The story resisted being wrapped up. Behind the scenes, policy discussions began. Evidence storage protocols were revisited. Funding for forensic labs was debated with renewed urgency. Lawmakers cited the case as proof that investment pays off, that patience combined with science can correct the past. Critics countered that relying on future breakthroughs risks excusing present failures. Both sides were right, and neither offered comfort to families still waiting. The phrase trusted neighbor lingered in public discourse, repeated until it lost specificity and became symbolic. It represented a fear older than the case itself, that danger is most effective when it feels familiar. Psychologists spoke on panels about cognitive dissonance, about how communities collectively rewrite memories to preserve a sense of safety. Accepting that evil can wear ordinary faces forces a reckoning few are eager to undertake. Cold case conferences featured the investigation prominently. Slides displayed timelines stretching across decades, punctuated by long gaps labeled simply no movement. Those gaps drew the most attention, not because nothing happened but because so much did. Lives lived, seasons changed while the truth remained static. It challenged the assumption that justice operates on a human timetable. A young detective approached the lead investigator after one such conference. She asked a simple question. How do you live with knowing the answer existed all along? He thought for a long moment before replying. You don't live with it, he said. You carry it. There was no wisdom in the answer, only honesty. As years passed, the case settled into textbooks and documentaries, its edges smoothed by repetition. Yet for those closest to it, the rawness never fully faded. Every anniversary reopened conversations. Every new cold case breakthrough elsewhere reignited comparisons. Progress became both hope and torment. The most unsettling realization emerged slowly, without fanfare. Solving the case had not banished fear. It had refined it. The unknown had become known. And what it revealed was more disturbing than mystery. The threat was not a shadowy outsider. It was proximity, familiarity, the quiet erosion of certainty. In the end, the California 1987 cold case stood as a mirror rather than a monument. It reflected the limits of memory, the power of science, and the cost of waiting. It asked uncomfortable questions without offering comfort. How many truths remain buried, not because they are hidden well, but because they are overlooked? How many answers sit inches away, waiting for the right moment to be seen? As night fell again, investigators across the country locked offices, turned off lights, and carried unanswered questions home with them. Somewhere, another case waited in silence, indifferent to time, confident in its patience. Because the lesson of this story was not that all cases are eventually solved. It was that some truths wait longer than anyone is prepared for. And when they surface, they change everything they touch. The silence that followed the verdict did not feel empty. It felt charged, like the pause after a thunderclap when the air still vibrates and everyone waits to see what has been struck. In the months after the California 1987 cold case was officially closed, that charged silence spread outward, seeping into places far beyond the courtroom. Followed detectives home. It sat with journalists as they stared at blank documents, unsure how to continue a story that refused to end cleanly. It lingered in the neighborhood, clinging to sidewalks and streetlights as if the past itself had learned how to wait. Inside the police department, the case file was archived, sealed, labeled. A physical act meant to signal finality, but the emotional file stayed open. Detectives spoke about it in fragments, never all at once, as if recounting the full story in one breath might make it start again. They focused on procedure now, how the evidence had survived, how the DNA chain of custody had remained intact across decades of moves, renovations, reorganizations. Each detail mattered because each detail could have failed. The realization was unsettling. Justice, they understood now, had balanced on a narrow ledge for years. Training sessions changed tone. Recruits were no longer told simply to follow instincts. They were taught to doubt them, to document everything, to preserve even the most trivial seeming items because time has a way of reassigning importance. An old coffee cup, a scrap of fabric, a partial print dismissed as unusable. In the shadow of this cold case, nothing was small anymore. The forensic lab became a place of pilgrimage. Administrators from other jurisdictions visited, asking questions that sounded technical but carried moral weight. What if this had been lost? What if funding cuts had gone deeper? What if one careless decision had erased the possibility of truth forever? The lab director answered carefully, aware that every response carried implications for hundreds of other cases hanging in limbo. Media coverage shifted from shock to analysis. Headlines softened but did not lose their edge. Cold case lessons. DNA and the danger of delay. When justice waits decades. Each article tried to extract meaning, to transform a singular tragedy into a roadmap. But meaning proved slippery. For every hopeful takeaway, there was a darker counterpoint. Yes, technology solved this case, but what about the ones it never will? The victim's family felt this tension most acutely. They became unwilling symbols of success. Advocacy groups reached out, inviting them to speak, to inspire others still searching for answers. Sometimes they accepted. Sometimes they declined, exhausted by the expectation that closure should make them strong. They wanted people to understand that resolution did not erase grief. It rearranged it. Pain did not disappear. It changed shape. At night, memories returned uninvited. Not of the crime scene but of ordinary days. Grocery trips. Shared meals. Laughter that once filled rooms now heavy with absence. The knowledge that the person responsible had been nearby all along added a sharpness to those memories, as if they had been retroactively contaminated. Trust once given freely now required effort. The convicted man's appeals process began quietly, predictably. Paperwork. Motions. Technical arguments detached from emotion. His attorneys focused on procedure, not innocence. They questioned timelines, lab methods, the handling of old evidence. It was a familiar strategy, one that shifted attention away from the act itself and onto the mechanics of proving it. The family followed these developments at a distance, bracing for the possibility that the story might yet twist again. Public reaction grew more nuanced. Initial outrage cooled into uneasy reflection. Online forums filled with debates about memory, about how communities mythologize the past to protect themselves. Some neighbors admitted anonymously that they had once suspected something was wrong but never voiced it. The admission was met with both sympathy and anger. Silence, people realized, has consequences even when it is born of fear or uncertainty. Cold case units nationwide reported a spike in tips. The story had reminded people that time does not necessarily absolve secrets. Old grudges resurfaced. Half-remembered details were revisited. Some leads went nowhere. Others reopened wounds investigators had hoped would stay closed. Progress came at a cost, measured in emotional toll as much as resources. The lead investigator began mentoring younger colleagues, not with lectures but with stories. He spoke about mistakes without defensiveness, about assumptions that felt reasonable at the time, about how easy it is to overlook what blends into the background. His message was simple but heavy. Familiarity is not innocence. Comfort is not truth. Outside law enforcement, artists and filmmakers took interest. Scripts were drafted. Documentaries proposed. Each promised sensitivity, depth, respect. The family listened cautiously. They had learned that retelling can either honor or exploit. The line between the two is thin, often invisible until crossed. They approved some projects, declined others, guided by instinct sharpened by loss. As years layered over the case, it became part of a larger narrative about justice delayed. It was cited in academic journals, in ethics debates, in discussions about surveillance, privacy, and trust. The cold case had transcended itself, becoming a reference point for questions that had no simple answers. How long should society wait before declaring a truth unreachable? And what responsibilities remain when waiting finally ends? The neighborhood continued to evolve. New families moved in, unaware at first of the history embedded in the streets. Over time, stories surfaced. Parents explained cautiously. Children listened wide-eyed. The past became a lesson, not a warning shouted, but a quiet reminder that certainty is fragile. That safety is not guaranteed by familiarity alone. Late one evening, long after media attention faded, the lead investigator drove through the old neighborhood. He did not stop. He did not get out. He simply passed through, watching porch lights flicker on and off, hearing the distant echo of ordinary life. It struck him then that the case had not ended with an arrest or a conviction. It ended in awareness. An awareness that would ripple outward, unseen but persistent. Because cold cases do not truly sleep. They wait. They settle into evidence rooms and memories, into unanswered questions and half-closed doors. And when one finally wakes, when science or chance or courage breaks the silence, it does more than solve a crime. It forces a reckoning with the past, with ourselves, and with the uncomfortable truth that some answers are closer than we ever imagined, hiding in plain sight, patient, watching, waiting. Time did not slow after the conviction. If anything, it accelerated. As if the city were eager to move forward, to place distance between itself and the years it had spent unknowingly sharing space with a secret. Yet acceleration does not erase tracks. It only stretches them thinner, harder to see, but still embedded beneath the surface. The California 1987 cold case had become one of those tracks. A faint but permanent line running through institutions, memories, and routines that would never quite return to what they were before. Inside the courthouse, clerks still remembered the weight of the trial. They spoke about it in lowered voices when new staff asked questions, pointing to archived files with a reverence usually reserved for landmark cases. The name on the folder was no longer just a defendant. It was shorthand for a failure that had taken decades to correct. Judges cited it in chambers when discussing evidentiary preservation. Prosecutors referenced it when arguing for extended funding. Defense attorneys referenced it too, as proof that time complicates truth, that memory corrodes, that justice can arrive dangerously late. The appeals hearings unfolded methodically, almost mechanically. No crowds. No cameras. Just quiet rooms where lawyers debated the meaning of protocols written long before DNA was ever imagined as a courtroom weapon. The arguments were precise, technical, stripped of emotion, but emotion lingered anyway, hovering like static. Every motion filed was another reminder that the past was not content to stay buried. For the victim's family, the appeals process felt like standing at the edge of a tide that refused to fully recede. They had braced for closure, only to discover that closure is not a door that shuts. It is a corridor with echoes. Some days were calm. Others reopened everything. A phrase overheard. A date circled on a calendar. A knock on the door from a reporter asking for one last comment. There was always one more question. Support groups reached out, connecting them with families still trapped in unsolved cases. Conversations stretched late into the night, filled with shared language only loss can teach. They talked about hope as a dangerous thing, fragile but necessary. About anger that shifts targets. About the strange guilt of resolution when others are still waiting. The family listened more than they spoke, aware that their story now carried unintended power. Meanwhile, cold case detectives across the state began revisiting files with renewed urgency. Storage rooms were opened, evidence bags re-examined, old photographs scanned into new systems. The work was painstaking, often discouraging, but driven by a new belief that time alone was no longer an excuse. Each reopened box was a gamble, each faded label a potential doorway. Not all cases yielded progress. Some led only to dead ends sharpened by expectation. Investigators learned to manage disappointment, to treat hope as a tool rather than a promise. Still, the ripple effect was undeniable. Funding requests that once stalled now gained traction. Legislators referenced the 1987 case during hearings, their voices heavy with implication. The message was clear. Ignoring the past carries a price. Public trust shifted in complex ways. Confidence in forensic science grew, but so did skepticism toward institutions that had failed to act sooner. Community forums filled with difficult questions. Why had certain suspects been dismissed so quickly? Why had neighbors' concerns gone unrecorded? Why did it take technology, not testimony, to finally force action? The answers, when they came at all, were uncomfortable. Schools incorporated the case into discussions about ethics and civic responsibility. Teachers framed it not as a crime story, but as a study in awareness. Students debated what they might have done differently, armed with hindsight they knew was unfair but irresistible. The lesson lingered. Silence is not neutral. Indifference is not harmless. The convicted man became increasingly isolated as years passed. Media attention waned, but his name remained searchable, permanently attached to the phrase cold case. Appeals denied. Petitions dismissed. His world shrank to routine and regret, though whether regret was genuine or strategic remained a matter of debate. Guards reported he rarely spoke, spending hours staring at nothing in particular, as if replaying a film no one else could see. In the neighborhood, anniversaries came and went with subtle acknowledgement. A candle in a window. Flowers placed quietly at a corner long ago associated with police tape. New residents learned the story secondhand, absorbing it like local folklore tinged with unease. They locked doors more carefully. They watched longer. Familiarity no longer guaranteed comfort. Journalists revisiting the case years later noticed a shift in tone. Early coverage had been sharp, dramatic. Later pieces were reflective, almost philosophical. Writers explored the idea that justice is not an event but a process, uneven and often unfair. The cold case had matured into a cautionary tale about patience and persistence, about the limits of certainty. The lead investigator retired without ceremony. No farewell press conference. No victory lap. Just a quiet exit marked by handshakes and nods. In his final weeks, he spent time organizing notes, leaving behind annotated files for those who would follow. He understood better than most that answers do not belong to individuals. They belong to systems willing to carry them forward. On his last day, he walked through the evidence room one final time. Rows of shelves. Thousands of lives represented by sealed bags and labeled boxes. He paused briefly at the space where the 1987 case had once sat. Empty now. Resolved officially. Yet the emptiness felt heavy, like a reminder rather than a relief. Outside, the city moved on. Traffic flowed. Sirens wailed and faded. New crimes demanded attention. But beneath it all, the echo of that cold case persisted, a low-frequency hum only audible to those who listened closely. To shape decisions. It influenced caution. It whispered warnings during moments of complacency. Years later, when asked in an interview what the case ultimately meant, the retired investigator answered slowly. He did not speak about DNA or arrests or verdicts. He spoke about time, about how it reveals and conceals in equal measure, about how the truth does not expire, but our willingness to search for it sometimes does, and about how dangerous it is to assume that what we do not see cannot see us. The California 1987 cold case had ended on paper. But in reality, it had transformed into something larger. A reminder etched into policy, into memory, into the collective conscience of a community that learned, too late, that monsters do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they blend in. And sometimes, the only thing colder than the case itself is the realization that the answers were always closer than anyone dared to believe. The story did not conclude with silence. Silence would have implied rest, a clean ending, a final breath released into history. Instead, the case lingered like a low cloud that never fully dispersed, altering the light even on clear days. Years after the verdict, the California 1987 cold case continued to exert a gravitational pull, drawing attention back to itself whenever another long-forgotten crime resurfaced, whenever another box of evidence was pulled from storage, whenever another family asked why time had been allowed to win for so long. In police academies, instructors used the case as an example not of triumph, but of vigilance. Cadets listened as photographs flickered across screens, grainy images from an era before digital certainty. They were told how assumptions had hardened too early, how familiarity had dulled suspicion, how the most dangerous errors were not lies but omissions. Notes were taken quickly. Questions followed. Could it happen again? The answer was never comforting. It already had, more than once, in places less fortunate with fewer resources, with evidence lost to mold and neglect. Technology marched forward, but the case served as a warning against blind faith in progress. DNA had unlocked the truth, yes, but only because someone had preserved the evidence long enough for science to catch up. For every success story, there were dozens of failures where samples were discarded, mislabeled, destroyed. The cold case was proof not just of what innovation could do, but of what patience demanded. Families of other victims reached out, sometimes quietly, sometimes with desperation. They asked for guidance, for names, for strategies. The relatives from the 1987 case responded when they could, careful not to present themselves as experts. They understood better than anyone that no two journeys were the same, that hope must be shaped to fit reality, not the other way around. Still, their voices carried weight. They had endured. They had waited. They had been heard eventually. Documentarians circled the story, drawn by its cinematic arc. Some were granted interviews. Others were turned away. The family learned to recognize the difference between curiosity and respect. They refused projects that leaned too heavily on spectacle, that framed the crime as entertainment rather than tragedy. The case had already taken enough. It would not be reduced to a cliffhanger. Within law enforcement, internal reviews continued long after public interest faded. Policies were rewritten. Evidence handling procedures tightened. Anonymous tip lines expanded. The cold case became a benchmark, cited whenever resistance to reform surfaced. It was harder now to argue that the past should remain untouched, that reopening old wounds served no purpose. The wounds were there regardless. Ignoring them only guaranteed infection. The neighborhood itself changed shape. Old houses were renovated, repainted, sold. Children who had not been born when the crime occurred now rode bicycles down the same streets, unaware of the history beneath their wheels. Parents debated whether to tell them, whether knowledge would protect or frighten. Some chose honesty. Others chose quiet vigilance. Either way, the shadow remained, faint but persistent. The convicted neighbor's name faded from headlines but not from memory. Online forums archived discussions that would never fully disappear. Arguments continued about guilt, about procedure, about the ethics of delayed justice. Conspiracy theories flourished at the margins, feeding on distrust and distance. Facts were reposted. Facts were distorted. The truth existed somewhere in between, unchanged but endlessly interpreted. In a small office lined with binders, a journalist who had covered the case from the beginning reviewed her notes one final time. She had moved on to other assignments, other tragedies, but this one stayed with her. It had taught her restraint. It had taught her the cost of certainty. She wrote a final piece not to break news, but to ask a question that had no clean answer. How many other stories were waiting for the right moment, the right technology, the right person willing to look again? Across the state, cold case units faced mounting pressure. Every success raised expectations. Every failure drew criticism. Investigators balanced limited resources against infinite need. They learned to speak carefully, to promise effort rather than resolution. The 1987 case loomed over them like a challenge and a warning. Solve what you can, it seemed to say. But remember what happens when you stop trying. For the family, anniversaries softened but never vanished. Grief evolved, losing its sharpest edges but gaining complexity. There were moments of peace, even joy, but also sudden reminders that arrived without warning. A song on the radio. A smell in the air. A news alert about another cold case reopened. Each reminder carried them backward and forward at once, trapped between what had been lost and what had finally been acknowledged. They visited the grave less often now, not out of forgetfulness but out of acceptance. They spoke aloud less, confident that words were no longer required. Justice, imperfect and delayed, had altered the relationship between the living and the dead. The absence remained, but it no longer felt unanswered. Years later, a young detective picked up the file during training, flipping through pages yellowed with age. She paused at the moment where the fingerprint had finally been matched, where decades collapsed into a single line of confirmation. She imagined the waiting, the doubt, the moment when certainty arrived, not as relief but as a shock. She closed the folder carefully, aware that she was holding more than a solved case. She was holding a responsibility. Because the true legacy of the California 1987 cold case was not the arrest, or the DNA, or the headlines that briefly roared and then faded. It was the understanding that time is both an enemy and a witness. That silence can be mistaken for safety. That evil does not always flee the spotlight. Sometimes it survives by hiding in plain sight, protected by routine, by trust, by the assumption that yesterday's questions no longer matter. The case taught a generation that justice does not arrive on schedule. It stumbles. It hesitates. It waits for someone stubborn enough to refuse forgetting. And even when it comes, it does not erase the past. It only changes how the past is carried. Long after the evidence was logged away, long after the courtroom lights dimmed, the cold case continued to speak. Not loudly, not urgently, but persistently. A reminder whispered through policy changes, through reopened files, through families who still waited. A reminder that the truth is patient, and that no matter how many years pass, it does not stop knocking.